How many of you has ever been in a situation where you were thrown into a place and you neither knew the norms, the language, or the culture? And New York doesn't count. So a few of you, that, ladies and gentlemen, is culture shock. And culture shock is defined as a state of disorientation where someone is taken from one culture to another, where they neither understand the attitudes, the norms, the realities, let alone the language. Culture shock has been one of the facets that has defined my experience here since I came to the US. And I want to be able to share some of those experiences with you. Now, I want to, because my mother always tells me that the best kind of story is one where you start from the beginning. Because usually when I'm explaining something to her, she tells me it's something with no head and no tail. So I want to be able to start with to the beginning with you. So imagine, I am from Senegal, West Africa. It's the lion head-looking country. And my mother is from the country north of that. And when I was 8, I had lived in Senegal in my grandfather's house while she fled as a refugee to the US. And during that process, when I was 8, she was working to get us, me and my 2 older brothers, here. Now, when I was 8, in my grandfather's house, there was an extended sense of family. Why? Because my grandfather always had 4 wives at any given odd year. And they would change from time to time, but you would understand that with 4 wives comes a lot of aunts and uncles. And with that many aunts and uncles, you have a lot of cousins. And so they all lived in this one big house where each wife had their own apartment. And in these houses, we also had maids. Now, maids are affordable, and anyone would be able to get them. They would work in the house for weeks at a time, so you'd grow up making them part of the family. You would call them either sisters, aunts, what have you, but they'd be part of that family. What we also had were neighbors. Now, neighbors, not in the sense that we understand here as someone that lives next to you, but a neighbor that eats lunch with you, eats breakfast with you, that eats dinner with you, someone you see all the time, someone that you would not call neighbor, but you would call your uncle or your aunt. That was my environment. And I remember this one time where back in our little town, we didn't have a lot of toys when I was 8. So how me and my peers would play was that outside of the house, there was this narrow street that trucks would run by. And now, don't tell my grandmother this, but we would grab on to the trucks and see how far we could go. And whoever got the farthest would win. What would you win? I don't know, but you would win. So there was this one time where one of our neighbors caught me hanging on before we got to our door. And so I jumped off and quickly rushed to our house. And Lord behold, she got there before me. She got to my grandmother before me. And that day, I knew no matter what I'd say, there was nothing I could do. So a couple hours later, my grandmother told me to take a cold shower in the middle of the day. Now, for an African kid, if you're being told to take a cold shower in the middle of the day, that's a problem. So I knew that there was trouble. And later that night, she beat me with a wire. Now, you're sad now, but it wasn't a sad moment to her. So she beat me with a wire, and I remember that night that the beating was so painful that I ended up sleeping under her bed because I knew that that was the only place that she would not care to look for me. I was determined to get away from her as much as possible. And aside from the occasional wire beatings, understandably, because she wanted to make a point. You don't hang on trucks as an 8-year-old. So I got the point years later. But at that time, I'm like, but as an 8-year-old in Senegal, my mom would send us these pictures of how the U.S. was. We'd see these mansions and these big houses, all these like sidewalks, and the in the streets that were clean, in these tall trees, and I was like, I can't wait to go to the U.S. because like it's a lot better than where I'm at now. So we had all these different things that we wanted to do when we got to the U.S. Um, and when we got here in 1998, me and my two older brothers, my first thought when we got to JFK was, whose idea was it to bring us here at a time of war? Because I had mistaken December snow for ash. I had never acknowledged that that was a real thing. And so for someone that is discovering snow for the first time, you got to understand why I would be like, someone was confused on this date. Let's go back and retry this in a couple months. So when we got here, that was my first experience with snow. And then when we went to where my mom was living, it was a 2-bedroom apartment. Understanding someone that lived in a huge house with people always eating with each other, with these extended families, now I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and 2 older brothers. That gives you a sense of loneliness. But I was determined. It was like, now we're in the U.S., let's make this work. There's something that we can do here. So couple weeks later, we had started school. And the first elementary school that I had gone to, I remember they sat me down in a classroom with kids that ate and slept English. And I did not know how to tell you my name in a sentence. And I was sat down, given these pieces of papers. I had understood that they were weekly quizzes because every Friday we would get them, but I had no idea what was on them. And when the teacher would tell me to give them my paper or why I didn't fill it out, I did not understand what she was saying, nor would I look her in the face. Because where I come from, you don't look at adults in the eye when they're speaking to you. She didn't understand that. So I went through 5 different elementary schools until one teacher decided one day that they were going to sit down and see why I was being unresponsive. And during my school changing, I was labeled as this troublemaker, this disrespectful student that was not paying attention, that was being disrespectful in class, when all they had to do was tell me, why won't you look at us in the face? That's all it took. And that, to me, was lack of compassion. So moving on to schooling and going on to high school, when I first started to go to school, I was the most proficient person in English at home. And so I was the one, as a 8-year-old, that would translate letters that would come to school, that would schedule doctor's appointments, that would occasionally, whenever they were satisfying to me, translate my report card. That stays between us, though. So I had done all these things, and I was forced to mature as an 8-year-old from being a careless, truck-grabbing kid to someone that was supposed to be making sure that bills were paid on time because I knew how to read English words at home. And when I went to school, I had to be an elementary student. I had to be a middle school student. I had to be a high school student. And then going on to college, when I finally graduated from The Ohio State University, the graduation wasn't just mine, because education is one of those pinnacles of the American dream that African parents have. Because when you graduate, it's not you. It's your mom that graduates. It's your uncle. It's the grandparents that are miles in oceans away that graduate. It's the aunts and uncles, it's the cousins, it's the far extended people that you didn't know you were related to that would call you and say, we're proud of you, because education and success, it's a family thing. It's not an individual thing. And so just imagine if no one had sat me down and understood what was causing my unresponsiveness in elementary school, then I wouldn't have had that success on behalf of my family. And so we have that, and then after college graduation, I decided to run for Columbus City Council. And I ran because I genuinely wanted to be able to be a voice for the communities that I am from. But as I learned, society is not as my head as where I would like them to be. Because one of the challenges that a series of the challenges that I had was people would come to me and not ask me what I wanted to do for them, but ask me, how do you pronounce your name? What kind of culture do you come from? What kind of food is that? What kind of clothes do you wear? Not about the competence that I have, but about the differences that we share, that we don't share, that they wanted to focus on me. And that I felt was unfair, and that was incompassionate, because it's not the only thing that makes me who I am. And so that's why I wanted to share this with you, that true compassion is love in action. And if you know anything about compassion, compassion has to do with what? Being able to not just understand where someone is coming from, but be empathetic to what their experiences are. And there are a lot of people here that go through a lot of culture shocks. And many of you have probably gone through a culture shock that may be minor or major that you are unconscious of. But to be able to understand that you have to have compassion to your fellow man in order to be a good neighbor to them is what builds community. And so culture shock plus compassion is what builds community. Because what we understand is that there are no neighbors, because there are no walls that separate us. There's what we have in common, and there's what I can learn from you and what you can learn from me. And that is what I charge you with. Let us all go and build community together. Thank you.